Well, welcome to Keys of the Kingdom. We did a brief video with somebody in government, actually my son, who actually works for the local county as a commissioner, and he was getting questions from other people in government concerning an argument, 1871 argument they call, or a theory about the United States government incorporating. And we did a little video on it, and the fact is it's very difficult to do because there are so many things that affect the way in which you hear the information that you're given. I mean, we have lots of preconceived notions about the Constitution, about the way in which the Constitution affects our lives, how we are a part. We were originally not a party to the Constitution. We, the people, did not refer to the average American. Most Americans were in opposition to the Constitution. They would have voted it down. Most of this information is not well known because it's been deleted from our educational system over the last 50 to 60 to 70 to 80 years. And so to talk about these things will just create more misconceptions if you don't know the underlying. So anyway, we had the conversation. We're really going to show that most of these guru theories that are out there about you need to fill out this paperwork, you need to change your name or the way you write it or your ID or all these other things are not the key to freedom. Christ gave us the key to freedom. Moses gave us the key to freedom. Abraham understood the key to freedom. And they are telling us this in the Bible, but we have a lot of preconceived notions about that as well. So anyway, we try to clear all those up, but it's not going to happen in a day because the Rome or the kingdom of God in your minds was not built in a day either. And so we're not interested in tearing down your particular philosophy or ideology or religious theology, but without replacing it with the truth. And that's ultimately our goal. And so these conversations will expand upon your understanding and where the misunderstandings are coming from. So anyway, that's why we had this conversation. Join the network. If you have questions, put it to us on the network. We don't have, everything we do is for free, so we're not going to necessarily address people who won't sit down and try to care about other people as much as they care about themselves. And so when you do that, we know that we can spend the time to help you understand what a lot of the world doesn't want you to know. There is a solution. Christ had it. Moses talked about it. Abraham talked about it. But there's a lot of people talking about Jesus, Abraham, and Moses that are giving you misinformation and creating more confusion. And so can we really clear up that confusion? Well, hear us out and ask questions. We want to be challenged, and we'll see where it goes from there. And so we'll just get right into the video. It's not all encompassing. I'm sure a lot of people are going to misunderstand things. They're going to think that we're saying something that's incorrect. Challenge us on it. It's really easy to win a debate when you're the only one that shows up. And we're not interested in winning the debate. We're interested in finding the truth, because we know it is the truth that will set you free. So let's just go to the video and see what we will see. Okay, so we're going to try to do a video here on 1871 theory about the U.S. government incorporating the United States of America and suddenly stealing everybody's rights. This has been wandering around through the internet for years now, and it's come up, and a number of people have asked us about it. So it has been suggested by some that this passing of the Act of 1871 by Congress formed a corporation as the United States, and this corporation is owned by foreign interest, and then it shoved the organic version of the U.S. Constitution aside. And is there any truth to that? Does it make any sense? Well, there's lots of different videos on it. There's a number of different web pages that talk about it. And it actually, the truth is actually much simpler but it sometimes seems complicated because a lot of people are uneducated or lack knowledge in exactly what the Constitution did, how it came about, what the Act of 1871 did, and really briefly I put in a little bit of a history of this, and we put it on our website at preparingyou.com. And basically, the U.S. Constitution required that we set aside territory to place the U.S. government on. The U.S. government is an actual entity created by the states. It is literally, if you look at the U.S. Constitution, it reads almost like a corporate charter for government. And what it, it explains about officers and limits of power and how much power it has and all these things. And it's two or more people gathered together for a particular purpose under the pre-existing authority of the states for the purpose of being this extra federal government. Before that, they only had the Articles of Confederation. So we're not going to go into the whole detail, but back in September 17th, 1787, this authority was given to him by Article 1, Section 8, and a couple of the last clauses of Section 8 to set aside this territory. And on July 16th, 1790, they did that. They did it with cessions of property from Virginia and Maryland. Now, some of that property went back eventually, but we won't go into all the details of the history. But basically, in February 27th, 1801, they incorporated. And they gave most of the power to the president. We cover all this, at least enough of it, so that you can understand what was going on. They had an addendum to that in March 3rd of 1801. But basically, the power over this District of Columbia was pretty much given to the president. The president would appoint certain people to take over the job of managing this municipal corporation. Things were in shambles come the Civil War. Roads were dirty. They were just basically dirt roads, and there was very poor sanitation. It was unhealthy to live in Washington, D.C., and so they reorganized with a new 1871 Constitution. Now, we can talk about a lot of this as we go along, but basically, it was a corporation long ago. They do have the authority based on the Constitution to do this. They did have the land cession by Maryland and Virginia, but like I said, some of the Virginia land went back. They also created 3 cities originally, which was, basically Washington and I can't even remember the names of the other 2 towns. We never ever talk about them anymore. It's been a long time. But they were municipalities, and they consolidated them eventually.
You're talking about the District of Columbia.
District of Columbia as a territory. Actually, they removed in 1874 some of the territorial controls, and but the different cities, Alexandria, Georgetown, and Washington. Anyway. But eventually they had the marshals set up in that March 3rd, 1801 addendum that would allow certain judges to set up literally what you would call today kind of county commissioners. Now, powers vary, and that's why they write these things down, and that's what's part of the corporate charters. But that's basically what they were doing and setting up. And so anyway, I also have a guest here, which is James Williams, and so we were going to talk a little bit about this, and there's lots of little points that they bring up in their videos and on their web pages that if you look at them, if you actually have a really detailed knowledge of not only what people think about the Constitution, but the actual history of it, you can say, well, that's not true. That's not true. That's not true. Because we have a lot of preconceived notions about the Constitution. So anyway, we're just going to wing this. We don't have a script really prepared. But that brief history, so in 1871, they did incorporate again to try to reorganize it. They were actually going to move government out of Washington, D.C. because it was such bad conditions. And Ulysses S. Grant said, no, we're not going to do that. And they kept it there, but they reorganized and started improving the sanitation, improving the roads, improving the conditions. And it stayed there. Now, there is a lot more to this than we're going to mention here, but we're just talking about the 1871 argument is really not the problem. There is no incorporation that suddenly took everything away. And what basically the principle is, as I see it, is we're trying to blame our present condition on somebody else's fault. And we've been doing this since Adam ate the apple. And we have to stop doing that and look into this deeper and being willing to see the truth. And because we need to be able to handle the truth. And the truth is, we have neglected things. We have done things that has altered the course of history as a people. And I'm not going to say that governments or the people in government don't have some burden of responsibility, but if you want your rights back, you need to take back your responsibility. So anyway, I'm going to let James throw in some stuff and see if we can't turn this into a conversation.
Well, it's interesting because when you you already had a bunch of this stuff written down on the Preparing You website, which has a tremendous amount of information and knowledge just kind of put out there. You can't trust Wikipedia for definitions in history and giving you definitions of what these terms mean. So I think Preparing You has actually been a really good alternative for people to turn to, not only because it brings, like subjects like this, you delve into the actual subject matter very deeply. It has facts. It has the footnotes, if you will, to any questions that you might have. And so when this was brought to me by a elected official here in Oregon, and I was having a conversation with him over the phone about some other things that were unrelated, and our conversation just sort of migrated to just what we're seeing today in the state of Oregon and in our nation. And it was very frustrating to him and myself, what we're seeing in our state and the future of county government, local governments, and what part we have to play. And he said, James, I'm going to tell you about this because I know that you'll go look at it. I know that you will go read it, listen to it, and think about it. Tell me what you think, kind of thing. And so I did. And it was Act of 1871 was the subject. And I went and I looked at a particular video, and I listened to it while I was working that day. I listened to it several times, actually. And it just kind of got my mind thinking about some of what you had just mentioned. So I think I had gotten home. I'd driven back to Summer Lake, and I came in the door, and I hadn't even really gotten to bed. It was very late at night, and I asked, what do you know about 1871? And I popped my head in to your office, and I asked, what do you know about this? And you started thinking about it. You started looking it up and started researching more. And over the last week, or last few days at least, over the weekend, you've been compiling a tremendous amount of additional information on this subject.
Yeah, we had something written down about 1871 under the Constitution and under what we have a whole page on gurus, patriot gurus, trying to tell us, all you have to do this and all you have to do is this and this is what it is. And I've been watching these guys for decades and decades and decades. I know a lot of them. And I would look at what they had to offer, and I would come up with, well, what about this? What about that? Well, I've lost a lot of friends over the years because I asked the hard questions. But I mean, this started way back when I was a kid going to St. Joseph's College in 1962. I would say, like, yeah, but what about this? And people would not. I don't know. Maybe I'm dyslexic. I equated myself with a guy in the accountant. That has to have all the pieces fit. Exactly. I just saw a show the other day where somebody was putting together a puzzle and the piece didn't fit, and they pulled up a scissors and cut off the piece that didn't fit and stuffed it in there. I can't do that. It's got to be the original piece, And so you take you back in history. So like I said, I already had some stuff written down. And I have other stuff that doesn't get up on that website.
Right.
And we have a lot of people, it's a wiki site, so that what that means, a lot of people say, they see me share one of these pages and they say, Wikipedia is not a good source. That's not Wikipedia. It's Preparing You.
Right.
Wiki is a software that allows multiple people to work on it. Not just anybody can work on it, but people that we have in the network that have been at this for years and years and years. And dealing with the people, so many people
working on the Preparing You section.
They've been doing other things too, but they bring their knowledge, they bring their expertise, and everything I'm not going to say is absolutely right, but the amazing technology allows us, like you say, footnotes. Not only that, but there's links on here, so that when we mention a particular word, like the Constitution, we'll take you to a copy of the Constitution. And you can take a look at what we're talking about. And so it's a resource, but the important thing is that we put all this information in a logical pattern and not just leave something out that is inconvenient to the scenario that we are presenting,
right?
The agenda.
So I've been really frustrated over the last few weeks of people that hold up the Constitution as a get out of jail free card. I don't know, for lack of a better term. They use it as an excuse or a method of saying, look, I have rights. If the Constitution is the only thing that you can hold up to prove that you're free, if that's all you have, you're in trouble.
Yeah, because the Constitution granted absolutely zero rights to the individual.
And eventually, and I know this for a fact, I will bet you everything that I have and my freedom that eventually that piece of paper that we hold up, the Constitution, will be used against you. And I believe it is being used against you now.
Right now.
So I don't approve of conservatives holding up that piece of paper as if this is the all. That piece of paper was written, and I've heard you say it many times, that it was written as if good men would take office.
Yeah, Patrick Henry.
Right.
But when bad men take office,
they will steal your rights.
Steal your rights through ambuscade.
Right. So what I was hoping to do, because that is, I was at a Bible study several weeks ago, and one of the main topics of conversation was freedom. It was the topic for the entire Bible study.
Which is reasonable because the Bible is all about freedom.
Oh, right.
Set the Egyptians free. Set the Israelites free from Egypt, as well as some of the Egyptians. That's the whole thing.
How many someone said, how many times does it actually say freedom in the Bible, though? How many times does it talk about? Well, it talks about slavery a lot.
Yeah.
It talks about slavery being a bad thing. And that's
liberty.
And liberty. And I wanted to quote something that we brought up in John 8. It was John 8:32. And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free.
If you're willing to hear it.
Right. If ye continue in my word, then are ye my disciples indeed. And so, in other words, if you follow what I say you need to be doing, these are the things that will set you free. So I want to start the conversation with the underlying principle of the truth setting us free. That we are in this pursuit of truth. So when I got the phone call, or I was having this conversation with this other elected official here in Oregon, and he said, hey, what do you think about this? And he's reading it, he's seeing it, and he's frustrated because he sees corruption. He sees this massive amount of huge portion of the politicians and those in representative offices in our state taking advantage of the people and taking advantage of the fear that the people are in. So he mentioned the 1871 argument and the Act of 1871. So I wanted to explore that and find what the actual truth was around that. Because it was portrayed, I think, or believed, and I can see how it's seen this way, that this was where things went wrong. And as I'm reading through it, and as I'm reading about 1871 and what I know about history, I'm not convinced that this is where we went wrong.
There was a lot going on in 1871.
Oh, granted. So that's what I want to explore.
That's not the only act of 1871. It was not only going on in America, but it was going on in places like Canada. They have an act of 1871 in Canada, which is actually a banking act that was bringing in ability of the Bank of Canada to borrow more money. That was also going on it started during the Civil War. Actually, you can go back to Andrew Jackson, and they were having trouble with that. But they needed to borrow money for the war, and that's usually what happens. You get greater and greater debt whenever there's a war. There was no exception in the Civil War. And so anyway, so there was also the Enforcement Act of 1871, which was it was actually 3 acts altogether. And see, this is the thing, this is how thorough we are, is that I'll go back and I'll read these acts. I will read the Supreme Court cases that sometimes challenge these acts and find out, and I'll also read letters of people who lived at that time. And so I develop a picture. This is what historians should be doing. Unfortunately, an awful lot of historians look at history with an agenda to prove a particular perspective. I'm trying to find the truth. And when you're willing to find the truth and look for the truth, no matter, like back to Patrick Henry, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. He wanted to know that whole truth and be able to provide for it. So probably one of the things that pops up right away in the 1871 argument is people go back to something that I talked about, written whole books about, is we the people. We the people, they talk about capitalization in the 1871 argument all the time, but we the people is capitalized. At least the first letter is capitalized. So it's not we and people. The people they're talking about is not everybody. When they actually wrote it, the only we the people that they were talking about were the names at the bottom of the document. And they had no authority to sign for anybody else or any state anywhere. They signed it to show that this is what they were presenting to the states. The individual states, when they ratified this individually, they began, 9 of them ratified it, and they agreed to it, and they started electing people to go and swear and be a part of the United States. Those people went to hold those offices. Those were we the people also when they held those offices. The average American, it was never put to him. He never voted on it. Historians almost all agree that had it been put to a popular vote of the people, it would have been voted down because they opposed it. Later on, the Supreme Court has made numerous rulings that the people were not a party to the Constitution.
Right, and that was well established back then, that the people of America were not a party to the Constitution.
The average guy living on his farm in fee simple was not a party to the Constitution. So, we the people does not refer to him. And there's whole arguments and everything. Now, I wrote a whole book about it. The book is free online. Contracts, Covenants, and Constitutions. And so anyway, it covers this in a whole chapter. So you can read the whole book. You can read it as articles. There's audios that go along with it. But we're not going to go into all that right now. But That's really important to understand.
Right. But you should. We can definitely link the article on this, and definitely make sure that people can gain access to this when they listen to the show.
Yeah, I've actually put the article links right on this page now, so you can go see it.
Right. And so one other thing, you said it on the page, and I saw it today, and I thought it was something that we should definitely bring up. And this concept of natural rights. I remember when I first took office, there was a lawyer said natural rights don't really, they don't really mean anything. It doesn't really have any bearing in the law. And I thought to myself, well, it's in the Constitution. So what is this natural rights thing? And of course, I asked that question somewhat rhetorically of myself, because I had history of knowing what natural rights were. And you bring that up in one of these, one of your paragraphs here. You say, since natural rights are passed from generation to generation, our parents can do things to bar our natural access to rights, just like the bondage of Egypt.
Right.
And that's a quote directly from the page. That was something that you had put in there, and I think that that's absolutely right. The natural rights. The idea, just say, I remember, let me see if I can say this. Say a guy just ends up on the Earth. Say he gets on a rocket ship and he goes to Mars. How about that? We're talking a lot about that these days. And these guys want to go to Mars and they want to colonize. Okay, so you end up on Mars, new planet. You could say you have certain inalienable rights. To protect yourself, to preserve your family and their lives. And there are certain things that we identify as your natural rights. Now, the Constitution was identifying those, but it didn't enumerate them. The whole point about it was identifying these are natural rights of mankind that we have no right to mess with. Not that so much the Constitution. Well, I'm talking the Bill of Rights.
Bill of Rights.
Sorry.
Well, it even specifically says the enumeration of rights in the Constitution is not to be construed as if the Constitution is basically giving you rights.
Right.
It's not.
Because
it's giving rights.
It's identifying
which are really
these
privileges
things
to government. That's what the Constitution was doing.
Right.
Giving privileges to government and
limiting them.
And this brings up an important thing. We need to go back.
But it doesn't grant you those rights.
No, they're not granted by the Constitution.
If you claim to be free, how can that piece of paper that is put together by men and women that were at that time all men, that basically said that, and you weren't a party to it, you weren't a party to the Constitution, so how is it that they had the power to grant you anything?
Yeah,
they didn't.
Yeah. This is just an important perspective. We don't want to hammer this into the ground, but the reality is if you think your rights come from the Constitution, you're mistaken. Your rights, the rights that you inherit, are natural rights, and you can also inherit responsibilities. When the Israelites went into bondage in Egypt, which was by contract and consent, now they could have not consented and gone off and starved, but they went to Egypt. Egypt fed them, but he made a deal. 20% of your labor is going to belong to the government from now on. 400 years later, 20% of their labor still belong to the government. The burdens became more extreme, according to what it says in the biblical text, because of one translation is crafts of state. And so there are crafts of state, but you don't lose your rights because of crafts of state. You lose your rights because of consent. And your parents can create obligations where you don't have the rights you used to have. Now, I've written whole books on exactly how you lose those rights. When you're talking about natural rights, don't really matter. Your grandfather, my father, was an attorney, spoke about natural rights when he spoke in front of the American Bar Association when he first became an attorney. Summa cum laude, big score on the bar exam. And he got to speak, and he spoke on natural rights. That was the topic of his conversation, of his speech. The head of the Bar Association, Texas Bar Association, came up to him and said that he wanted to give my dad, Mr. Williams, some advice. Never speak about natural rights to attorneys again. because there's no money in legal courts concerning natural rights. Legal courts are about legal rights. Early American courts were common law courts, and they were talking about natural rights. You go back and you read these court cases and what was going on, and you can, people are always throwing up Supreme Court cases to me about this or that or the other thing. First thing I want to see is, what's the date on the Supreme Court? Is this pre-Civil War or post-Civil War? And this is one of the things that I think gives the 1871 argument some interest, is because it was right at credence, because it was right at that time when a great many things are taking place. The 14th Amendment had more influence over what would eventually be your freedoms or lack of it than the 1871 corporation of an already existing corporation, which was a municipal corporation. They were just revamping it, shifting the power and authority around, which it said from the beginning was the absolute power of Congress and the president, because the place was a mess and they wanted to clean it up, and it ended up working, cleaning it up. Had nothing to do with your individual rights. Now, as to, there are several other arguments that they bring up on this, but the point is natural rights. If you want to know about what your natural rights are, don't look in the Constitution, because they're not in there. And understand that even though you have inalienable rights or natural rights, you can lose access to those rights. They still exist, but they're on the other side of a wall that you created, usually by contract. And there are all kinds of contracts. We're really not going to have time to go into that. This will be an all-night show.
Yeah.
But anyway, we go into that in other places. We got hundreds and hundreds of hours of explanation on a lot of these subjects, and we will do more if people have questions. And that's how almost all these pages, this page has expanded to its own page off of the original Constitution page because of the question that somebody asked you. And I had background information in it, but I needed to understand more about what was going on. Some of the numerous points and facts, should we go over some of those, or did you have something else?
Yeah, you could, absolutely. I do have something else that I think leads into this quite well, but yeah, please go ahead.
Well, I put down, I just jotted them down. I'm doing a lot of this on my phone when I'm out on the desert. Then I come back and I slip it in. But the Constitution was created by the people, was not created by the people, nor by their consent, which we already covered that.
Right.
It's not, we the people didn't have anything to do with the Americans. It doesn't mean that you're not a party to it now.
Right.
But at that time, you were not a party to it. It doesn't mean that you haven't consented to a lot of it now.
Or consented to something.
Consented to something that makes you a party to that. But back then, it was not put to the people. They were not a party to it. And we, the people, didn't refer to it Americans. That's very important to know. It was an agreement between the states. This argument, there's Federalist Papers, Anti-Federalist Papers, Madison wrote about that. He said it shouldn't even say we the people, it should say we the states, because it was an agreement. The states were the pre-existing authority that was literally incorporating the United States federal government with the Constitution, because their terms that the states put down, ratified, at first illegally, and eventually now it has been ratified, which we go into in the book also, which again is free online. I'm not selling you books. I'm trying to share the truth with you. Is that they were creating a single body politic, a corpus of America. It wasn't the Americans, it was just the government. That's why it couldn't be in the states. It had to be in that territory outside the states, because its jurisdiction was not in the states. Another common thing that we point out over and over again, Clark's Summary of U.S. American Law, I think it's on this page even, I put it in there, is that the individual states, before and after the ratification of the Constitution of the United States, were as foreign to each other as Mexico is to Canada. Mm-hmm. They were separate nations. That's why they call it sovereign state of Texas, sovereign state of this, because why they had their own constitutions. Not so much anymore. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and we can go into that, but not here. But I'm just pointing these things out. If you don't understand that, back in these times, you're going to miss what the Constitution is really all about. You're going to start misinterpreting it. It did not grant sovereignty to the people. The people earned their sovereignty before the American Revolution. And we go into this in great details, reading the newspapers of the time, speeches of the time, that the people came to America to say goodbye Babylon. That's actually a quote from one of the early American settlers, referring to what was going on in Europe. And they came here to take back their responsibilities. Not everybody who came here, but a lot of the people, enough so that this is where it became a bastion of freedom. We don't learn that history anymore. They haven't taught it in the schools in the last 25 years. Even when I was going to school, which was a lot more than 25 years ago, I already mentioned that, 60-some years ago. A lot of times some of the school books, I was in private schools. I'd never been to public school. I was in private schools, and the books I had were old books. And they were still included. I could remember when my brothers were going, they were older than me, and they were going to high school and into college, and I would look at their books when I was a little kid in grade school. And they were learning stuff. Right. They did not teach me.
Right.
Because stuff has been deleted. And, I've done a whole study on this. We have articles up on that.
How many copies can you find of Clark's Summary of American Law?
I got one in here. But my father gave me that, and he had it when he was in school. But I've seen them going for like $1,500.
Yeah.
I don't know how much they go for now.
It's hard to find.
It used to be, actually, when we first moved out here to the desert, you could get a copy of it in the local library.
Right.
You could get copies of history books written by Charles and Mary Beard.
Right.
And those were good history books. But and we go into the whole history. What they were telling us has been removed from our common knowledge. They've been removed from our history books. And I noticed it as I was reading history books, but I didn't think it was a conspiracy until I studied the Reese Commission, which was a commission by the United States government in 1954. And we wrote about that now. There is so much information here. And if you find something that we have wrong, let us know, because that's how we
learn, because the truth is what sets us free.
Iron sharpens iron.
Right.
So anyway, a couple other things. Sovereign citizen is often a misnomer, and loss of sovereignty of an individual free from things public is usually by consent. So we've talked a little bit about that. People talk about there's a sovereignty movement, or people like to say that they're sovereign. Let's look at what definition of sovereignty you're talking about. A sovereign makes law. You don't make law. I don't make law. I can make a law for my kids, maybe.
I can.
I can make a law for myself.
Yeah.
But I can't make a law for you. So I'm not really meeting the criteria of a sovereign. Right. If you're in a government where the majority of the people can make law for the minority of the people, you're not in a republic.
Right.
You're not in a free nation. You're in some sort of mobocracy. And 51% of the people can take away the rights of the other 49. But anyway, so those are some of the things. There's actually a number of bullet points that we can go down. But
yeah. Do you want to take a quick break?
We can.
Just make a natural break, basically.
Yeah. Okay.
Don't push stop though.
Okay.
It was annoying. There was a little tiny piece of fuzz and a little tiny bit of hair that every time you speak, it would flutter.
We're a bunch of OCD guys.
Yeah. So I figured if you wanted to grab some water or something. So go down a few more bullet points, and then I'll give you something else we can talk about.
Anyway, we have a whole page on gurus that are telling you, this, and most of these people out there, like, I'll just call her Judge Anna. She goes by about 10 different names, but those people who read about this stuff will know who I'm talking about.
Or is this still in the 1871?
This is still 18. She does the 1871 thing a little bit too,
okay,
but
that's
she
right.
strays off. And there's also the informer. I knew him personally, and I've written about him. I've written about all these different gurus. I mean, there's so many of them, I can't keep up with them. Most of the time I get involved when somebody is getting shafted or somebody's going to jail because they listen to some of these guys. And I'm not saying that everything they're saying is a lie. I'm not saying that they're all charlatans. There are some charlatans out there. There is a lot of misinformation. And misinformation is not necessarily a lie, but a lie by definition is often simply leaving out important elements of fact.
Right.
And you need those elements of fact. I mean, because your position is based on a chain of logic, and your logic is only as good as the weakest link in that. So if you leave something out, or overlook something, or just ignore something. And I've seen so many times where people would ask a question, and I've even done this when I was first talking to people, lawyers and policemen and whatever. They would say, I would ask a question, they say, oh, well, that doesn't matter. Oh, that's not important.
Like natural rights.
Yeah, but it would haunt me, and I'd have to go back. Is that piece of the puzzle that doesn't fit? It is important. And so, and still to this day, when people ask me a question about different things, if I don't know the answer, I'm going to go look for it and see what I can find. And that's another whole story in itself. But, so I have links to a lot of them. Admiralty law is a thing that comes up a lot of time. That we're all under admiralty law. I actually had this conversation with my father, and when I first heard it, and he was pointing out, no, it's not. And actually, sometimes where this information comes to me in the strangest of ways, but it's not admiralty law. It's something that looks a lot like admiralty law, which is equity. And equity is not law. It winks at the law, according to Bigelow. It follows the law, but it's not law. And then you can get into Star Chamber courts and all this stuff. It can get very confusing, but it's really all very simple. The solution is really very simple. Once you're willing to accept responsibility, and once you're willing to see your part or your lack of participation, and then we can show you examples in history where people realized this thing and moved from positions of bondage and corruption and the fall and decline of Rome to a position of freedom and liberty. Freedom and liberty is not a utopia. There's a lot of work to being free. But the Bible talks about the perfect law of liberty, because the early Christians were operating according to the perfect law of liberty. We haven't been doing that in America for almost 100 years.
Right.
It's been getting worse and worse and worse, and our rights have been diminishing and diminishing, and there's a simple process that we're going through to make it worse, and all we have to do is turn around and go the other way, and it will get better.
That's going to be very difficult for some folks.
For some folks, it will be impossible until there's a changing of the mind.